So we know for some time that culture eats strategy for breakfast, thanks to Peter Drucker and dozens of others who've written on this topic of the effects of culture and climate on the success of organizations. Culture permeates everything from our homes to our cities to our nation. Culture permeates our school systems, our schools, and our classrooms. Matter of fact, Gallup tells us that if a student walks into a classroom and they have at least one adult on campus who inspires them about their futures and engages them in that, they're 30 times more likely to be engaged than those students who don't have that opportunity. And so culture affects everything from the boardroom to the classroom. A little known fact is that the average tenure of a U.S. superintendent in U.S. public schools is less than 3 years. How can you possibly sustain change in our complex school systems when you can't keep leaders in place for a long time? And so I remember one time sitting around the table with a group of business leaders, and they said, Dale, why is it that you have these high-performing school systems in parts of the city and other parts of the city not so much? And I said, well, have you given attention to those adults who sit in the school boardroom? Do you know their stories? Do you know who they are? Do you know their agenda? Are you giving attention to the kinds of leaders that are leading the work that we do? So culture absolutely affects everything. And so we talk about this topic of culture eats schools for lunch, and how lessons from high-reliability organizations may help U.S. schools thrive. We give thought to the fact that currently our system is this more toxic and blame-focused culture on schools that aren't performing. We have a blame and punish model, kind of this draconian era of accountability. And in the end, this is a culture that eats our schools for lunch, and I believe there are lessons that we can learn. I've been in this business for 25 years of public education, and I've found a few truths to be self-evident. We all have this hope for the success of public education in America. You have this hope for your children. I have this hope for mine, and together we held this hope for all children that our country serves. Matter of fact, we're unique as a nation in that we offer free and appropriate education to every child, no matter the color of the skin, their nation of origin, the language they speak, their income status, the ability that they bring to the classroom, even the content of their character. No matter what comes through the school door, the U.S. school system is expected to make a change and transform that child into a productive citizen that can engage with their society and make a difference. Yet what we're experiencing is a more and more complex environment, more than just what we signed up for around reading, writing, math, and science. The crises that find themselves in the classroom come from our homes, come from our cities, come from our nation. And so how do we manage these things that we find within our school systems that are much more complex than we ever dreamed or imagined? Matter of fact, just in my own tenure, these are some of the things I've personally experienced in my tenure as a superintendent. You can just imagine the effects of poverty on a community that used to be the All-America City in 1977. San Bernardino City was the All-America City, the epitome of what a nation should be, and yet here we are with bankruptcy and food scarcity, which leads to poor health among our children and a broad range of other diseases, and then leads to drug and gang violence, and drug and gang violence leads to trauma, and trauma affects our children and how they learn when they come into the classroom. And so those that signed up for reading, writing, math, and science often are left with all these other variables they have to navigate, and trying to learn how to navigate takes time. Imagine this, this is a picture taken from our elementary school campus. Just on the other side of the fence, this plane crash happened, and then in December 2nd, tragedy of a terrorist shooting and shots being heard right outside of some of our own schools, and you can imagine the ripple effect on the entire community about how safe are our schools, how safe is our community. And then on April 10th of this past year, domestic violence turns tragic into a school shooting, taking the life of a dear teacher, a student, and injuring another student. And we find public education is now becoming this marriage of reading, writing, math, science, and the complexities that we find, volatile type things that occur, uncertain events that occur, complex and ambiguous events that occur. These are called VUCA type environments, and we've learned and I have a hunch that this is a much more complex system that was originally ever intended. Think about it. In 1793, Massachusetts enacted the first laws for compulsory education. By 1918, there was sixth grade education mandated for everybody in the U.S. schools. And then, you think about a 100-year anniversary About 90% of our students are in U.S. public schools, and it's about time for us, I suppose, to ask that famous Dr. Phil question: how's that working for us? How's our system working for us? Is it being effective? And a matter of fact, really just 50 years into the journey, there was already a report published that said, in the 1970s, it said, crisis in the classroom. The reimagining or reinventing of schools needed to occur. Then by the 1980s, we had this Nation at Risk report citing how we were falling behind from all these other countries. By the year 2000, seeing how far below we'd fallen. 2001, we implemented the No Child Left Behind Act and set this huge bar for 100% of our students would be proficient in reading, writing, math, and sciences by 2014. Few made it over that bar, most did not, and that ushered in this era of draconian accountability and caused this kind of blame, fear-based system that exists in our school, much of our schools today. And then you heard things like back in 2012, a report came out that said that the condition of our public schools was a national security threat. And even echoing the past of failure is not an option, the old almost failure of the Apollo 13 and similar conditions for our schools, and this is where we find ourselves today. And so how do we navigate these complexities? How do we take on a school system and cause the kinds of changes that are necessary? And I believe it starts first and foremost with culture, and it starts also first and foremost with driving out fear from organizations. And this we learned from Edward Deming years ago. You must first and foremost start with driving out all fear from the organization. This is our number one aim. And it's been my aim as I've been superintendent of the district to first start the kind of a journey that we could go and look at this system with a different lens. And I have to thank several colleagues of mine. A good friend of mine, Dr. David Van Stralen, introduced me to other experts in high reliability organizations, work he's well written on the topic. He introduced me a good friend, is Tom Mercer, former admiral of the USS Carl Vinson. I'll talk about a little bit of Tom's work in leading the USS Carl Vinson and one of the most award-winningest naval aircraft carriers in the fleet. And others like Carl Weick, who wrote the book Managing the Unexpected and was involved in earlier publishings of In Search of Excellence, this whole quality journey. These gentlemen understood this kind of effort and knew what these things were. And Chris Hart, the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I'll share some stories of their involvements with our journey in this kind of social experiment in our public education system. Could we make our public education system a high reliability type organization, like those organizations that have no room for error? And it's important that failure is addressed so that there's no failure in our system. And what we have to start with, and my good friend David Van Stralen talked about, is eliminating fear, because fear gives us these responses where we either we have fight, flight, freeze, or surrender. And often when you have a top-down bureaucratic model, people get into this fight system. They want to protect their own worlds. They back into a corner. They don't want to participate because they're afraid of this kind of structure. Or they flight. They leave the profession altogether. Or they freeze and they just acquiesce, as many of our students do. They surrender because they know there's not much they can do about it. So here we have this system in public education where we set fear, when fear exists, it becomes toxic in the culture and it ends in a deadly crisis for many of our nation's children. So I propose we have a lot to learn from high reliability organizations to root out fear. And so let's take a look at one of these high reliability organizations, which is usually nuclear engineering. I don't think anybody would argue there's no room for failure when it comes to a nuclear power plant. And so what we know is from the Fukushima disaster is that there were two power plants when the 9.0 earthquake struck Japan and caused a subsequent tsunami. And Daiichi and Daini, who were led by two different kinds of leaders. Daiichi was led by the kind of leader that didn't understand the fear response in this situation, and most of them fled. The leader fled to a press room to give his press conference and release, and the workers automatically fled the plant. In Daini, they had built the kind of culture where they understood how do we self-regulate fear, how do we come under control, and the leadership came down instead and worked with the staff one-on-one and helped to limit that crisis by setting a simple goal. Said, look, let's just cool these reactors down to 100 degrees before we leave. They did that, being able to mitigate that disaster. Well, think about our military special operations. They have components of high reliability organization leaders where they have this reluctance to simplify, this preoccupation with failure, this sensitivity to operations. They understand that there's the mission given, but then there's also the mission that may occur. And so what they do is they practice and they look at all possible ends where failure might occur, and they practice multiple scenarios because there's that mission given, there's that mission that may occur, and they flatten the organization on their team. That you may be a captain running out with these other folks that are not officers, but they flatten that organization so it's not a power over organization, it's a power with organization, to where they listen to each other well. Anybody on the team at any time can say anything that needs to happen to cause success. And then you look at the National Transportation Safety Board, and you look at my friend like Chris Hart, who leads that function, and as you listen to him and he talk about the number of accidents that occurred in the aviation industry, if it occurred what occurred in the 90s occurred today, we'd have 1 to 2 CNN level events every month. And mind you, not many of us would want to fly. So they had to make a change, and what did they do? They created a new kind of model. Instead of a blame and punish model, they created healthy ways to look at fear, healthy ways to look at failure. They brought together all the different stakeholders in a form of collaboration so they could build the kind of system that shifts from control to a collaborative culture. And they shifted from blame and punish model to a human and systems model, where they looked at the humans, they looked at the systems, they were hard on the systems, soft on the people, made it safe for anybody to report those kinds of failures that occurred. And then the training of those kinds of things. Had an opportunity to have coffee one day with Sully Sullenberger, and you hear his story when he landed on the Hudson. He had this sensitivity to operations. He grew up in a high reliability organization, and he had this commitment to resilience, and his level of expertise, many said that he'd been training for this his entire life. And right before that hits the Hudson, he says to his team, "Got any ideas?" He knew the power of checking in with everyone on his team to know that he's not the only one with answers in that moment. So he had the solid foundation that he built upon with the fundamentals. It's like my son who plays jazz. You can improvise once you have the fundamentals mastered, but you can't improvise and be successful if you don't have that kind of experience. And then I will never forget walking the USS Carl Vinson with my good friend, former Admiral USS Carl Vinson, Tom Mercer. And he tells a story of he created the kinds of condition on that naval aircraft carrier that anybody on that ship had the ability to shut down operations. That's the kind of power he gave to his employees. And one day a mechanic, he tells a story, lifted up a bolt. He realized he had left his socket on the deck, the mechanic had, and he had to bring it to the senior leadership attention, and here's how it worked on that aircraft carrier. Tom Mercer comes down, and they walk shoulder to shoulder, everybody on that flight deck, up and down, and they until they found that socket, because they knew foreign object damage could cause millions of dollars of damage to a jet and the destruction of that entire ship. And so here they took on that culture, and later Tom recognized them for their success in front of the entire fleet. You see this in neurosurgical centers where they become much more flat organizations. Egos are out the door, titles are out the door, where a nurse can say, "Doctor, have you washed your hands?" The simplest things. And so this is a kind of culture we're working to create in San Bernardino City. So 6 years ago, I came into the district. We're about 50,000 students. 92% of our students are in poverty, are traditionally marginalized students of color. We have 90% of our students in poverty. About a third of our students are English learners. When I started, our graduation rate was among the lowest of any comparable district, about 66.8%. Today, our graduation rate is 86.1%, surpassing this county, the state, the national average. We were recognized by the College Board as the only large urban in America with the largest gain for students ready for college. We have a number of other accolades, but what I'm most proud of is we have over 8,000 students engaged in a couple dozen career pathways across our district. Pathways where students are strongly engaged in real-world experiences. And what we've done is we've grown this culture in our community. Matter of fact, it happened just yesterday. We had our annual community gathering. I want you to imagine a room with over 1,000 people gathered. Folks from higher ed, faith-based service organizations, public sector, private sector, coming together with us to talk about how do we create a different kind of system for our kids. And because of these real and authentic relationships, we have commitments made from our county that will attach a one-to-one adult with every kid and child who's in a pathway at the senior level to an internship. We have these commitments with Loma Linda University Hospital System, where the doctors have come to our schools, and when we hear the doctors tell their stories, in healthcare, and they come back to our schools around Indian Springs High School, where the median income is about $12,000 to $15,000 a home. And the doctors come back from working with the kids, and the story is that they're telling that kids are telling them that no one's ever thought we could perform at this level. And the doctors are in tears because they're realizing these kids have the incredible potential. So we brought our schools out to healthcare. We brought our school leaders out to advanced manufacturing industry. So if you could imagine a third grader, fourth grader using the adult version of computer-assisted design software and rendering 3D printing of things they've designed. You can imagine when they marry these two industries, advanced manufacturing and healthcare, they're able to produce 3D printable prosthetic limbs in a research and development project with our local university system, hospital university system. That's what our kids are doing in our schools. And our latest partner has been Amazon. Amazon has reached out to us. They want to build a national model of a logistics career pathway in our industry. Think about the possibilities here as we build out not only logistics, but drone technologies, using cybersecurity technologies, robotics. We're looking at, right now, there's work going on in our schools around geographic information systems and advanced technology farming at one of our continuation high schools, I might underscore. And they're doing some fantastic work because of pulling these partners together and flattening the organization, creating a culture where everybody's voice matters. If you're a teacher and you have an idea, let's get behind your idea and let's say, how do we take that idea you have and put it into action, put it into motion? It's the kind of culture that matters from the boardroom to the classroom. I want you to imagine a school where 100% of the students graduate from high school, 100% complete their A to G college course readiness, 100% apply to or accepted to and attend four-year universities. And that today is Middle College High School in San Bernardino City Unified School District, one of the top 10 performing high schools in the state of California. This is possible to turn our system around. We've made much progress, but we have much progress yet to make. And I argue that we can only do this work. Long gone are the days that we can have public education do this work alone. Jim Clifton wrote in his book, The Coming Jobs War, that the public education crisis is not a public school system crisis alone. It's an entire community crisis. So I want you to think about, what can you bring to the equation? What can you do to cause the remaking and the renewal of your own school system? I want to invite you to participate in that conversation at the local level, even if it only starts with your active voting. Do you know who the people are? Can you name the people in your boardroom now? Do you know who the leaders are? Can you support them in some sort of fashion? Because I want you to think about it's who's leading our schools and insist on a culture that allows the adults and the students in the system to thrive. Thank you.